I have made progress on my unpacking. I also moved.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
Wow, moving during a pandemic is also, oof.
Yeah.
I'm
Good
still
luck with-
unpacking from my move, and it was months ago. So
Mm.
yeah.
This was almost 15, 16 years ago. When I lived for a couple of years down in Florida, and when my grandmother died, we had to pack up her house, her condo, and her and my late grandfather, they'd lived there for 45 years. And so we were cleaning out closets that hadn't been touched in easily years, if not decades. And we still found stuff in boxes that may or may not have been from the last time they moved, that just got, shoved into a crawl space, put under a piece of furniture, whatever it was, and it was just out of sight, out of mind, gone. And yeah, it's super easy to just be like, oh, where did this come from? Mm, it's all done. Yeah.
Oh dear.
Uh-oh. Well, and knowing is half the battle.
I've had
Oh,
that
but
problem.
yes, remembers. Yeah, no proper stream happens without technical issues or cats.
This is why you have these minutes of just sort of chit chatting and whatever before you actually start talking about anything real. Nobody in the chat needs to care about us telling stories about moving and unpacking, so that's okay that they.
Now we've got the
Right.
the help from chat. Thank you, chat.
Yes. Thank you, chat.
Here, I'll even be good.
Thank you.
I'll go. Thank you, chat. I'm usually not in chat when I'm trying to be on stream,
Right.
Because otherwise I get into my other job mode. But I wanted to say hi.
Indeed.
So, shall we go ahead and get going?
Yeah, let's party.
I don't know what people have on their schedule. It's early for you though, isn't it, Lauren?
It is. It's only 5:00 here, 5:15. So after we're done, I have several more hours of work to take care of. So
But work is this D&D work?
Mostly.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got some just adulting to do as well, but some D&D stuff.
Right. Okay. That's fair.
Well, I guess some of it is D&D Beyond work, so I guess that's adulting too. That's work.
I mean,
yeah.
You work may have to do with a game that you love, and it can still be work. So
this is truth. This is truth.
One of the reasons I've resisted, I've had some people ask me to do the run games for money thing.
Right.
It's now kind of
in vogue,
growing thing.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I've balked is if I start taking money for it, it feels like a job.
Right.
And I will stop liking it as much.
Yes, but I've been on. So I've done this now twice because I did it with being a musician, and now I've done it with being a D&D person. And yeah, there is that shift in where it suddenly becomes a job, but it's all about finding the balance, because most of the time when it turns into a job, it's not that the stuff that you were doing before for fun suddenly stops being fun. It's just there's extra stuff that comes along with the job. And so it's keeping that separate. Remembering that the stuff I have to do for taxes and, the weird emails I got to take care of and all this other stuff that isn't really what I was doing for fun. That's just the job stuff that at least is tangentially related. That's what helps me anyway, but that is a legitimate concern, especially for nowadays and where so many people are turning their hobbies into jobs.
No, I live in a world where I have enough obligations that I don't need to add obligations of another paid gig. So I'd rather keep my game a game, There's a degree to which I've stopped. We've had sponsorships and whatever for the podcast as well, and I don't seek those out anymore. If somebody comes to me, then we have that conversation, we do something, but I don't want to look for it because then then there's responsibilities, and I just like doing the show, So
there you go.
It's the same reason I stopped reading the reviews on iTunes and whatever. So,
there you go.
All right. So let me hit record on the audio. So Sam will have some fun things to edit.
Do you need me to do anything, or am I all good? Okay.
According to your talking and me seeing waveforms bumping up and down on my recording software, I think we're okay.
Okay.
All right. So, I'll get back to the script. I've been discussing, I really need to get a second monitor so I can do streamy stuff on one and recording stuff on another and script over and whatever. But in the meantime...
Oh, yeah. Second and third monitor have been
I was just looking into it a little bit because it's Prime Day for the people. Well, this won't be on the edited version. So everybody live knows. So it's Prime Day, so I was watching Amazon Prime a little bit just to see if there was some really particularly good deals, particularly if I could find one that is compatible with my Mac without having to add a converter, but I don't think that's going to happen. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right. You ready, Tracy? All right. I just wanted to get a word in there because you won't stop talking.
I know.
All right. All right. This episode of The Tome is brought to you by listeners like you. Thanks for using The Tome's Amazon and DM's Guild affiliate links, and for becoming patrons at patreon.com/The Tome Show. Welcome to The Tome, a D&D news, reviews, and interviews show, and I'm your Tome host, Jeff Greiner.
And I'm Tracy Hurley, and in this episode, number 344, we're going to find our own way and make it up ourselves as we discuss homebrewing.
Breaking our isolation in this episode are two great members of the gaming community. You've seen her on Dungeon Drunks, monthly modules, Heroes Graveyard, and hanging out on a bunch of places in D&D Beyond. It's Lauren Urban!
Oh, hi!
And if I missed anything on the list, it's only because you don't have it listed on your website, because that's where I pulled that from.
Oh, geez, my website is so old. Yeah, go to my Twitter. So right now, I'll give the quick update. So for the regular show, I'm on Silver and Steel, which is the live show that D&D Beyond produces every week. That's a continuation of several of the other shows, Beyond Heroes and Heroes of the Veil. So I got the same character kind of going on through. That's the main place. I am still the DM for Dungeon Drunks, and then you can just find me on some of the other D&D Beyond shows, showing up here, there, and everywhere.
And also, having just returned from his latest excursions into the wild, it's our monstrous ecologist from the basics of the game, the unrivaled master of D&D TikTok. It's Jeremiah McCoy.
Greetings and salutations. Not
the
exactly
master of D&D TikTok. The arch wizard of D&D TikTok. Okay.
That I might accept. I might accept that. I can be the elderly mentor of D&D.
You're the Gandalf of the D&D TikTok Fellowship. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That I'll accept. That one I'll accept.
And we'd like to take a moment just to remind folks that if you want to see the Tome recordings live and unedited, perhaps see how my basement looks today, or what cool t-shirts we're wearing and whatnot, you can watch us record at twitch.tv/Tome Show, or later on YouTube. And you can be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Discord for reasons Jeff's about to tell you.
not reasons I'm about to tell you. That was left over from an old script. We had a contest based on Discord a couple months ago. So, but we don't need more. We just have fantastic, wonderful conversations and super supportive people. I'm always super happy because one of the most active areas of our Discord is our fitness channel. And so there's all kinds of like, hey, this is what I'm doing today, and I'm not sure if this is working, and we're just all like there cheering each other on, and it's super awesome. So that's right.
Hashtag D&D Fitness.
So now it's on to our discussion. This is a discussion that came from a tweet that Lauren made about a month or so ago. You had mentioned, Lauren, how much you like doing stuff like this because it was giving you life in these times of isolation. So I said, hey, if you're enjoying having these kinds of conversations, we should have you back on and have some of these kinds of conversations and give each other life. And so we started trying to plan it, but you were super busy last month. And so we pushed it to this month in October. And I said, okay, great. What do you want to talk about? And you're like, I've been doing a bunch of homebrew stuff lately, and so here we are. So I guess the point is, for everybody watching and listening, when you discover that this episode is like the best thing that we've ever put out, it's completely Lauren's doing that we've done so well.
Well, hopefully it is something that people enjoy, and when it is not, and
if
you can just blame
if it's
me.
not the best
totally
thing ever,
my
it's
fault.
because I took your wonderful idea and ruined it.
Nah, that's not how this works. Nope. If you're gonna put the credit on me, you're gonna put the blame on me too. I'm willing to accept that. I am a DM. I know how that works.
Look, the buck stops with me. I'll take it. It's fine. So, yes, Tracy's husband says that I ruin good things. That is absolutely acceptable and accurate. So.
Aw.
All right, so we're talking about homebrewing things, and I don't know. We've been doing this show a long time. I am certain at some point in the past, if you look through our archives, we've probably talked about homebrewing things before. It feels like a thing we've talked about. But I don't remember who with, and it wasn't with this crew, and it's been a while, so I think it's time to have that conversation again. I think that's worth doing. For anybody who may be new to the community or just not familiar with the term, who wants to tell us what we mean when we use the term homebrew?
Are we doing this? Is the Webster Dictionary defines homebrewing as? I don't know if there's a specific definition for it, but I'll give it a crack. I think it's any unofficial content that you come up with yourself.
That's fair. I think for some people it can sound like a scary term for like people who are new to D&D. They're like, homebrew, I don't know how to do that. Well, it's really, you don't have to worry about it. Homebrew is the step below like trying to get published stuff in some ways. It's also a test bed for stuff that you might turn into a published thing. But as long as it's fun for you and your friends, whatever you come up with is fine.
Yeah, see, in my mind, like, I like to differentiate. If I'm homebrewing something, it's not because it has anything to do with any desire to ever publish anything, right? Homebrew is a whole separate thing. If I'm testing stuff out because maybe I want to publish it someday, that's playtesting. That's not homebrewing,
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. See, now I don't distinguish between the two. I feel like anything that I have come up with that is, even if I end up publishing it in some way, putting it out into the universe for other people to use as they will, whether it's paid or unpaid, that's my homebrew. It might be someone else's content that they've purchased or downloaded or checked out. But if I've made it available to other people to just try out and use, then I still feel like that's my own homebrew. I've come up with it myself, and it's not official content. But you
well, and it's more so a distinction of intention, because if I'm it's a matter if I'm trying to put something together that maybe I want other people to see and enjoy and whatever, then there is, in my mind, I go through a very different process if I'm just homebrewing for my own game than if I'm creating something for others' consumption. For example, if I'm homebrewing for my own game, I don't really care about balance very much. Because it's not important to me. I just want to be able to tell the story I want to tell, and that's what's important for my campaign, right? If I break the world and make the game unbalanced, then that's my problem, and I can deal with it. But I don't want to break other people's games, So if it's for others' consumption, I don't want to do that.
That's true. So do you ever take your own homebrew and then balance it and publish it? Or are you always creating something with a different
It's worth
intention?
noting that I create very little with the intention, other than this podcast, I create very little with the intention of sharing with others. So most of what I'm creating is homebrew. And so I don't usually, in those instances, most of the time I don't care about, balance and that kind of stuff. Now, certainly one could homebrew something, find that they like it, be inspired by it, and then go on to test it and tweak it and make it publishable. As Fred is pointing out in the chat, what is the Forgotten Realms except Ed Greenwood's original homebrew setting, right? So
Absolutely.
I could go further. D&D is a homebrew of Chainmail. It is. They took an existing war game and went, let's tack on some bits.
So yeah, and none of that's. I don't know that any of this conversation, while interesting, is really the point, right? But it's an interesting sort of. It impacts my mentality when I'm thinking about homebrewing something.
I think whether or not, whatever you think your definition of homebrew is, and it's certainly flexible and malleable, I like that you brought up the idea of intentionality, because I think, we obviously disagree a little bit on that, but I don't think either are wrong. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about is, what is your intention in creating this? Is it, I'm only creating this for my home campaign, and so if it's wacky and off the wall and not balanced at all, that's fine? Are you creating something because you're inspired to create it and then you're just going to put it out into the world? Are you crafting something that you are then going to play test? Are you doing one thing and it ends up being another? I think homebrew encompasses all of those things all in one, and it is kind of a catch-all term, but it's the thing that happens when someone says, "Oh, are you playing a published module,
right,
or are you doing a homebrew?"
Well, and I think that brings up really the point, right? Whether we call it homebrew or not isn't really that's just semantics. The point that you make is approach it with intentionality. Know what you're doing it for.
I tend to do all of the above at different points. Like I've gotten stuff published and I will publish stuff again. And sometimes I approach what I'm writing from a standpoint of, well, this is intended to be published. Somebody asked for a thing. I made a thing. Here it goes. And sometimes it's just, here's an idea. I'm not sure if I'm going to use it myself anytime soon. I'll toss it up on my website, see if anybody likes it. And, I'll try and keep it balanced because I expect other people to use it. And then sometimes it's, I need something right now. I'm running a game that did something sideways. I need to come up with a solution. All right, here we go.
Yeah.
How about you, Tracy?
I was going to say it's probably a little easier to talk about what homebrew isn't than to talk about what it is, because there's all these different options, and some of us do like to write and publish stuff, so we probably want to or think of including things that maybe folks who are just starting out wouldn't necessarily jump to right away, like whether or not we're ever going to publish it. Probably not the first thing some folks are thinking about in that situation. But yeah, the fact that it sounds like what we're really saying is pretty much anything that's not an off-the-shelf published module that somebody's created could be considered homebrew, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that every DM homebrews something, right? There's been data. I know Mike Shea and I think possibly Watsy as well has gathered data on the settings that people play. And the most popular setting is homebrew, right? No published setting gets a majority, but homebrew does, right? So when you're creating your own setting, that's homebrew. When you're creating your own adventures, that's homebrew. Maybe you just need to make your own magic item or design your own encounter or whatever. Like, the game is made to give you the tools to make your own stuff, and all of that is homebrew.
Yeah. And I think one thing too that kind of falls out from that at least as I was always been kind of important to me is the understanding of, like, when you start creating those things, even if it's little things like creating your own magic item or adding a new area in town or NPCs or something, and you're creating that stuff and you're going beyond what's published, that's also a great way to start expanding out what's available in our community. And so, because I hear a lot of people who are like, I can never figure out how to get published or anything like that. And it's just like, share the stuff you're creating and know that creation itself, whether or not anyone buys it, is just as important as the stuff like third parties or even official stuff.
And we've talked a lot about sort of home brewing and the connection to publishing and that kind of stuff. And all of that is absolutely true and worth bearing in mind. But I also think it's worth bearing in mind that, like, 98%, I'm making the number up, but 98% of homebrewed material is done so with zero intention of ever publishing anything. It's just something that somebody put together for their game. And I think that's arguably more important than the preparing to publish stuff, because that's what's going to make your story sing.
Absolutely, yeah. And then if you put it up later, if you put it out there for fun, if you're like, well, this is a cool thing I created, let me get some feedback on it because I would like to get better at homebrewing. Even if you never go down the path of, whatever you consider publishing, whether it's DM's Guild or your own website or Drive-Thru RPG or whatever, just going through that process to get feedback to make yourself better for the next thing you create for your home campaign that is homebrew. I think that's just as good. And it's one of the reasons when you asked me, what do you want to talk about? I came up with homebrews because a lot of what we've been doing on D&D Beyond is doing a lot of educating people on how to use our homebrew tools, because they are really powerful, but they can sometimes be a little difficult because you have a lot of options. And it's also exciting to be able to put something together that mechanically works with your character sheet right there, give it a try, see what modifiers it takes, see what, differences it makes. And then be able to put it out for the rest of the audience if you want to publish it there. I've been just having a lot of fun doing that with a bunch of stuff, just putting it up on my site. But it's kind of fun to do that without the intention of, well, I'm not trying to make any money off of this. I'm not trying to promote it. I just want some feedback. I just want to see if, hey, does anybody else think this is fun and cool? Does anyone else think this is balanced?
I think there's a degree to which, like, it's a fun thing to do to contribute to the community as well. I've used the homebrew section of D&D Beyond quite a bit. I'm running Curse of Strahd, but, like, my players are a little bit higher level, and they're just now starting to get to, like, the werewolf den. It's like, it's not challenging to throw them up against a bunch of, what are werewolves, CR5 or whatever, and they're level 10, and, like, what's the point, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna walk through it and know, whatever. But I do a quick
Spoilers.
Right. Spoilers for an adventure that first came out 20, 30 years ago. No more. Sure.
But
absolutely.
A lot of people are running for the first time.
And it's being republished. I know. But so I went into the D&D Beyond homebrew search, and I found other people's takes on, like, alpha werewolves and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to steal that one. I'm going to steal that one, and that's going to be that character. And so that was great. It was just, it was very little interaction with the community, but they were creating something, and it's useful in my game. And I don't know if it's balanced because I don't care. It's my own campaign. So whether they make something that's completely unbalanced or not, whatever. I also use it a lot because, like, I have a bunch of Kobold Press stuff that I like to use, but you can't buy Kobold Press stuff on D&D Beyond, but I can go into the homebrew section and add all those monsters I want to use. And I also found that a lot of those sections you can just sort of copy and paste into their appropriate fields, and you don't have to do much else, and it works. So,
Yeah, I use that for my home Midgar game. The other thing I use D&D Beyond for on doing homebrew, even without using their homebrew tools per se, is if I want to do like a subclass or something like that, I will start with go to the class listing on the page, find a subclass, copy, paste it on a notepad, remove all the bits, but I know what level everything is supposed to be at.
Mm-hmm.
And it just simplifies the process.
well, I think that's one of the. I mean, we haven't really gotten into the tips and tricks of how to homebrew yet, but I think that's one of the key things to consider is that when you're creating something for your game, you don't have to like do it from scratch. And in fact, many times you probably shouldn't. Right? Find something that's close, but it's not quite getting where you want it to go, and then just take it and change it into so that it is getting where you want to go. Right? That's that.
Oh yeah. I mean, the easiest
Right.
thing is reskinning, right? Is not
Yeah.
even changing any of the stats or anything. Being like, I do that all the time for my players. Of like, okay, I want this monster, but this monster is a CR2. My players are level 15, so let me find an appropriate CR with the powers that kind of work for this monster, or that maybe I'll change like one or two things, but all the math is worked out to be the CR I need. But I'm just going to show them the picture of this CR2 monster, or I'm going to use this monster. We're going to show them a picture of, some other thing I found. And that right there is homebrew. It's as simple as that. And then it's just how much more in depth do you need or want to
Right.
go from there?
Well,
Yeah, you could.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say a good example of reskinning. I've I may have done something similar to this once. Not letting any of my players know, but take a beholder, then rename all its powers and make it an archmage.
right.
The only thing that makes it a beholder is the image of what the beholder is. If you change the names on everything, these are just powers that the archmage are throwing at you, and it makes it scary. But it's unknown until you show up and encounter it. That it's throwing all these powers around, and they're like, "What's going on?" It makes it surprising. It makes them scary. And you don't really have to do much. You just change the names and things.
So I think it's worth noting, and we've kind of alluded to it pretty strongly, that homebrew can cover a lot of things, right? You could be tweaking a monster or a magic item or whatever, but you could also be increase a little bit in complexity by making your own feats or your own spells or whatever, and you can go up to your own subclasses, your own entire classes, your own adventures, your own settings, right? And you can sort of, and I don't know where I lost the scale at some point. I don't know where the scale of complexity is. I don't know if, to me, making homebrewing an adventure is less complex than homebrewing a class, because there's all kinds of balance issues and moving parts to consider in a class.
Sure.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, but when you think about it objectively, a subclass or a class is just one little piece, whereas homebrewing an entire campaign or a world sounds like a giant undertaking. But I think all of us as DMs have done bits of homebrewing for a world before, either on the fly or have run a homebrew campaign or whatever. And I think as DMs, that's what we're trained to do, right? At least on the fly, is homebrew the world on the fly. And then you might extend that out to, here is my homebrew campaign, or even bigger, my homebrew world in a homebrew campaign. We're kind of trained that that's the thing we do. And so that doesn't seem as daunting as, here, make this one player's subclass balanced, and they're going to play it for the rest of the campaign. That sounds ridiculous, but that's really only one small subset.
I would set the top end scale of difficulty, creating a system, like a new research system, or a new between game action system or something like that. That's probably the hardest. Taking an adventure, the easiest is taking an existing adventure and just moving it into a different setting. Like, instead of, Waterdeep, this is in some other city in this other
Right. I almost ran Dragon Heist in Sharn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But that's still fascinating that we'll immediately gravitate towards homebrewing the things that seem like they're the most expensive.
Yeah, I think you're right. A campaign, an adventure, a setting, these are big, expansive projects, but at least in my mind, the consequences of screwing it up are really low. Which is worth noting generally. Like, if I screw up a class and a player is playing it and I've made it too powerful and it's broken and it's ruining the fun of the game, that's a lot harder to walk back because that player likes doing it, right? And they like the fact that it's broken. Whereas if I mess up something in a setting, then I just change the setting a little bit, or even if I have to go so far as to retcon it, like players accept that a little bit more than if I take away their fun toys for the class they've been playing, So that's where I guess complexity is. It's not about complexity. It's about my own personal anxiety on these different tasks. So
that's fair.
I also think it's different kind of problems. Like, one is a system problem, which seems more daunting than just coming up with a story. Like, coming up with a story, we're all used to telling stories. We've all shared our favorite story of something that's happened, or they talk about a TV show we've liked or something like that. Telling stories is something humans just do. Coming up with systems and classes and feats and things like that sort of ties into that. Feels more daunting because it's not telling a story. It's, okay, I got to figure out how this system works.
That's true. And once again, doing it for your home game, offline, not streamed, not published, just you and your friends having fun, is way less daunting than, I'm going to take this adventure that I just homebrewed, that I just ran, and now write that all out and publish it. I think you come back to that, well, now I have to come up with something that at least reads on paper as cohesive and balanced, when a lot of this was just stuff I was making up off the top of my head.
Well,
so
and that happens a lot.
Again.
When people go through that process, they homebrew something, and even when it is streamed, there's a degree to which if I'm streaming something, I don't care as much about balance, right? And if somebody comes at me, that's not balance, I'm like, yeah, but that's okay. It's my campaign. I'm not trying to sell it to you. So somebody, I think it was Craft Imaginatious, I'm going to say is how you pronounce that, mentioned earlier on in the chat that, the Blood Hunter class that Matt Mercer published was basically just a homebrew class that he made for was it Vin Diesel or whatever, right? And then he published it, right? And arguably all of the stuff that Matt Mercer did in Critical Role was homebrewed. If you look, I noticed it particularly in season 1, mostly because I haven't listened to very much of season 2 yet. But if you in season 1, there's all the vestiges of divergence. There's all these magic items and all these other things going on. And he had, or people had sort of backwards engineered sort of what the stats were and whatever and how they worked. But then when he published the Tal'Dorei book, they didn't work that way. There's a reason for that, because he wasn't as worried about balance and making it work for everybody's game and perfectly within the system. He was doing something fun in his own game, and that was okay. You don't want to have it so unbalanced that it doesn't work, right? That it breaks the game and ruins somebody's fun. But yeah, so this, that's the process. And it's a matter of intentionality.
Yeah. And it does get a little interesting there because, so on one hand, one of the reasons why people buy things often is because they're looking for a balance. On the other hand, those sorts of assumptions that we have built into what it means to have a published adventure or a published class or something like that sometimes means that they can't push the envelope, and pushing the envelope is one of the things we often want when we homebrew. So it gets kind of interesting because it would be nice if we could have like, hey, this is just on balance, deal with it. You still bought it, feel free to use it or not if your DM allows it. Sort of thing might be cool because then we could have more of this sharing, kind of what's already happening anyway through D&D Beyond, where you just pull stuff off from that people have created and shared out. We know it might not be balanced. It would be nice if we could extend that out to what we consider
Sure.
published stuff. Or
Yeah, no, and I don't know. In my experience, anyway, when I decide to homebrew something most of the time, because I'm not interested in publishing content at this point. When I decide to homebrew stuff, it's because there is a narrative need in my story, and what exists isn't quite doing it, right? There was a moment way back in 4th edition, and I can't remember if Jeremiah used to be in my campaign back in the 4th edition days. And I can't remember if he was around when I had done this, but there was a moment when I needed to be able to make somebody a chosen of I don't remember if it was Mister or something else, right? But there's no way in the system to do that, or published way in the system to do that. So I made a way, right? I made a thing or a template to sort of lay on top of it, and did it make the person more powerful than they otherwise would have been? Absolutely. That's kind of the point, right? But I needed to be able to do a thing, and nothing else sort of did that thing.
Yeah. I think one of the more common subtle homebrews that I've seen lots of people do, and they just don't think about it as homebrewing, is changing the stats on monsters.
Yep.
I have pretty much accepted that the hit points as written on the stat blocks is not enough for most of the encounters I have run, and I have to increase them to the max that they can start with, or give them a block bonus of 50% more health or something, because otherwise, it's dead in the first round. Okay,
that's not even technically homebrewing, because the rules tell you to do that. Like that number is an average. Yeah. So that's why there's a range after that in parentheses. So.
Right,
but that's step one, right? That's the first step into the larger world of homebrewing, right? Is feeling empowered, even if you're doing something within the rules. That moment, I would argue it is still homebrewing, even if it is, encouraged by the rules homebrewing.
Yes. And craft imaginationists, no, you're not the only one that experiences that problem. That there are a lot of people who have mentioned it, and part of that is, I think a lot of the stats are written for Adventures League play, which limits what you can start with in ways that maybe if everybody's rolling stats, or a generous DM is giving lots of points for their things, or maybe give them a free feed or something like that, they will have a higher output of capability than maybe an Adventurers League character can, because they've got more limits on them. So if those monsters are possibly particularly challenging if you're using standard array and limiting the options to PHB +1 or something like that, whereas I can pull from third-party publishers, homebrew stuff, things like that, and I toss them all into my game, my players might be more powerful than what the monster was written to deal with.
It's also super dependent on party makeup too. I mean, if your party just happens to be more roleplay focused or more support focused within each other, they may still be super effective at battle. They just may not have the same damage output as a party that's got a battle master fighter and a raging barbarian at their front lines, who happen to have advantage on a bunch of stuff, and so they crit more often. Like, that's another thing where we all just end up homebrewing depending on the party makeup of the group that we have. My high level campaign, my podcast, they're up to level 16. My barbarian crits on something, they better have way more than 100 hit points even at the start, because the damage output that he can drop, and he's got a magic sword, but it's nothing super powerful. I really haven't homebrewed a ton of stuff for him. That's just how barbarians work. That's their joy. And so it's deciding on how to craft those bits of homebrew or those changes I'm going to make to monsters to let him still feel powerful and be effective and slaughter things without everything dying in the first round and it
Yeah,
not being a
no, I think one
challenge.
of the first
So
things I started regularly homebrewing in fifth edition was monsters, and um, particularly like the boss monsters. I found that fifth
yeah.
edition doesn't give me boss monsters that were bossy enough, to really do what I wanted them to do. And it was actually in a behind the DM screen conversation with Mike Shea and Sam Dillon when I was running Out of the Abyss. And I'm like, the demon lords aren't badass enough. Like, what do I do? Right? And they gave me some good ideas. And some of it was just like, you've got a range of hit points, give them more. And I'd go to the max or whatever. But some of it was also like, if they've got a multi-attack ability that allows them to do, 2 tentacle attacks and a bite or whatever, allow that to basically be 3 actions and use it to cast multiple spells in a round, or hit something and cast spells, and do this to tweak their damage output to make it more of a threat. And I did all of the things, and it worked brilliantly. Suddenly the monsters, the big bads were big and bad, and it worked really well.
Yeah, another thing is published encounters. Don't be afraid to you've only got the single boss monsters that they're going after. Give them minions. If the PCs have to spread out their attacks, they are less likely to round one kill the bad guy.
Well, and arguably, every time you are running a published adventure and you change something, that's homebrewing too, right? And I would argue that most of the published WotC adventures run better if you do change things. So there's,
Tailor for your players.
I don't know that I would pick up any of them and just run them off the shelf as is. Some because I want to tailor it for my players, and some because there's some places where the narrative doesn't quite flow like I want it to, and that's maybe just my preference as a DM or whatever. But make those changes, homebrew it, right?
Yeah, and I think the whole point all of us are hitting on is homebrew is not scary. Everybody does it. You shouldn't be bothered by it.
So I gotta ask, because a lot of what we've talked about is the obvious homebrew. It's the homebrew for in service of a thing that we are doing. We're homebrewing a monster. We're homebrewing a setting. We're homebrewing because we have to, because we want to do something that we need to do. Have you had the other experience of just, I'm making something because I'm inspired. I'm making something for the fun of it. I'm making something because this thing looked cool and now I want to make a version of it.
There was definitely a time in my life when I did a lot of that. And then I became a teacher. And then I went to grad school, and I'm a parent, and all of the time for that, for fun, went away. So...
Yeah.
That's what I'm here. I certainly have been known to do that for my blog. I wrote up a couple of Gravedigger inspired things. I haven't played them. I don't have any of my players playing them, but I think Gravedigger is a cool icon. I've played one at a LARP, so I was just like, I want to make Gravedigger stuff for D&D. So I wrote it up and put it up because I thought it's cool and I wanted to share it. I don't expect anybody would go for it, but I thought it was cool.
How about you, Tracy?
Yeah, I mean, so I jumped in. I started playing about 10 years ago. I jumped right into DMing and created my own world because I wanted to, which kind of is in between. I also had, nothing spoke to me. So I created it, which I'm not sure exactly if that matches the thing. The other thing I'm thinking of is that a lot of the stuff where I did a lot of fun, interesting things was actually for publication. But I was part of, when we did the Lost City, we did a lot of that sort of wouldn't it be cool if, and we just kind of built off of stuff. And that was a lot of fun, but I know that's not fun.
You used to make stuff, homebrew stuff, and just sort of experimentally. I wonder how this would work to publish on your blog as well. So,
Yeah, it's been a little while only because last few years have been kind of busy, but you know, I love doing that sort of stuff, and that's why I don't think I've ever for my home game ran a published adventure. I've only really done that when I ran at conventions.
So the reason I ask is because that's partially why when you asked what do you want to talk about, I said homebrew was that's kind of become a thing I've started to do a lot of actually is just be inspired by silly conversations on Discord, on the internet, on Twitter, on, wherever I am. And I've for the first time ever in the last couple of months just been making stuff and putting it on D&D Beyond and making it public and going, here's a fun thing. And most of them are kind of silly fun things. Usable, workable in a game. I try to balance it a little bit. But not anything that's come out of my games that I'm running, my games that I'm in. They don't come from a need of, oh, I wish this thing was there. It literally was fuzzy socks. Everyone likes fuzzy socks. I'm gonna make a pair of magic fuzzy socks. What would that be like? There we go, fuzzy socks. And so now I have a homebrew fuzzy socks. And it's been interesting to go through that process with magic items or spells because those are fairly, I'm not gonna say easy, but in relation to even to monsters or especially to a subclass, way easier to just kind of uh, essentially just type up and be done. I mean, I have a whole bunch of magic items that don't require any stats, that they just do role playing things. And so you don't even have to worry about numbers. And there's something very freeing about having that conversation, oh, I love the alchemy jug, it's one of my favorite magic items in all of D&D. And I've homebrewed my dungeon drunks to that their alchemy jug makes some other things, but then in a conversation it was like, well, what if it made solid things? Well, it's a jug, so it doesn't make anything solid, so you'd have to have a box. Okay, so it's an alchemy box. Well, what does the alchemy box make? Well, of course, it only makes solids. Well, what kind of solids, and then going down that weird
Does it make fuzzy socks?
It does not make fuzzy socks. Would you like to know what the alchemy box makes?
Step 1, get a box.
Step 1, get a box. It is a small wooden box. 6 inches by 6 inches, always weighs 12 pounds. So it's very related to the alchemy jug. It makes cheese, wax, soap, butter, glass, rubber, chocolate, clay, yarn.
Fred says it should make pizza.
Because, we thought about a whole bunch of stuff. When I was talking about this on the Discord, the inspiration was the alchemy jug, and the decision was you want basics, with only a couple of fun things. Like, of course, there's mayonnaise in the alchemy jug, which is fun, which is why the box can do things like chocolate. But at its core, what makes it a useful magic item, as much as I love to use the alchemy jug for mayonnaise, what makes it useful is that it's a bunch of basic things that you can use in other things. And so making these basic solids, and that was it. That's I have yet to actually use this item anywhere. I've not given it to my players. I've published it on D&D Beyond. It's like, there you go.
It's a little bit like, it's a little bit like, how players will get bored and have ideas and just make character after character after character after character. That's what you're doing, but for DMs.
Sure.
Or for players. I mean, you always, as a player, have got to have that moment of asking your DM if it's okay to bring a homebrew to the table and, going through that. But yeah, just having that fun moment of inspiration and creating something, and especially for low-level magic items, low-level spells, things that even at their most powerful could not break your game, I find immensely fun to create.
Absolutely.
To this day, my favorite magic item is the immovable rod.
It's a good magic item, yeah.
It is an item that asks you to be imaginative to make it useful, and I think anytime somebody comes up with a cool lower end magic item that just requires you to be imaginative in how you use it, that is the sweet spot. That is the special sauce as far as I'm concerned for D&D.
It's like prestidigitation and thaumaturgy. for spells.
Yeah.
Why are those such popular, awesome spells? Because of neither of those are incredibly powerful unless your imagination can get you there. And if your imagination can get you there, you're usually doing something so outlandish or awesome that your DM is going to let you try. So yeah, those are it. I mean, it's great to drop a power word kill, but I would much rather see some imaginative use of, like you're saying, those low level stuff. And it's super fun to make. They're
Oh
just
yeah.
it's ridiculous fun to just sit in a chat room and be like, all right, so I'm gonna make a cheese plate. I'm gonna make a magic cheese plate. Here we go. I said I was gonna
There you
bring all
go.
the snacks, so I just and that I've when we've then talked to people who have created their own homebrew for publication, whether it's they're just getting into crafting adventures or crafting subclasses or whatever they're crafting, um, going through that process of just making for the fun of it, I think is really useful. And it then inspired me to do a lot of what Jeremiah, you were talking about earlier about going in and seeing, looking at the subclass and seeing what's the pattern here. All right, I'm going to make a cleric subclass. So at what levels do they get what? Where do they get these normal things? What's the kind of the patterns that people are used to, so that I can create something that's in the framework that people are going to recognize as, oh, this is a cleric subclass, and then go from there, because that's so much easier to do than just like, here's a blank piece of paper, go. And being able to dig into, all right, I want to make a magic wand. Well, let me see what some of the other
Right.
magic wands do. Well, I want to make a suit of armor. I want to, whatever you want to make.
Yeah.
Going back and seeing the mechanics behind the others
Yeah,
really
when
helps.
I think that's the biggest piece of advice I have in terms of crafting mechanical bits for the game, right? Or homebrewing mechanical bits for the game is takes things that exist and then change and tweak and build from there. The other thing, at least this is me personally, because there's still a 12-year-old inside of me that just wants to make things awesome all the time. So I have to rein myself in a little bit, and so when in doubt, my mantra is err on the side of a little bit underpowered, because it's almost always actually overpowered. Because I've got that 12-year-old who just wants to be awesome. Yeah.
Interesting. I when I was creating a subclass, one of the things that I read was to go ahead and make it more powerful than you think, or go ahead and let it be OP, because it's actually easier to scale back than to make more powerful. And at least I've only done it once. For me, that ended up being true. It was way easier to kind of scale back and rein in and adjust a couple of numbers and keep the flavor. Whereas if I had gone with the no, rein this back and dampen this down, you can kind of lose some of that flavor. But I think that also depends on where you're coming from. If your inner 12-year-old is making things more excited and you're making everything, D12s and all right, go ridiculous with it, then yeah, maybe at that point you have to
Well,
think
and
about
it comes down
scaling.
to intention again too. Like if I'm doing it for my own game, there's a reason this player wants me to make this thing for them, wants me to make this subclass, wants me to create this race. They want to do a thing, right? So as long as I'm allowing them to do the thing, if it's a little bit underpowered and I recognize that, and then I give them a little bit of a boost later on, they're not going to be mad at me. But if I make it overpowered, there's no way I'm going to pull it back at that point, because I don't want to take away their toys that they're having fun with, so...
I will go more overpowered if it's just for my home game. If I know what the player's shooting for, I don't mind giving them something a little broken. Because I also control all
Right.
the levers on the monsters. So if it becomes too broken for what is, normally they're going to run into, I can just crank up the damage output. I can crank up the hit points. I can throw more monsters in to make it just as challenging. So it doesn't matter how broken the thing I gave them was. I control all of that. The only time I really worry about whether or not something is too broken is if I intend it for other people to play with. That's the only time I actually care about it, because I don't want to do that to somebody else who hasn't sort of internalized that they control all
Right.
those levers, and they may feel trapped by something that they're using. It's like, well, I don't know what to do, and I can't be standing there next to them. Well, you can just do this, this, and this, and it's fine. That's the only time I really care about if it's broken. If it's for my home game, I don't care.
Well,
Here,
and
have
certainly
something
I will
broken.
give broken things to my players in my home game quite regularly, but I want to be intentional about it. Like, I don't want to be surprised when I break the game. I want to be like, okay, I'm giving you this thing and I know it's unbalanced, but I'm prepared for that because I know it's unbalanced. Whereas if I homebrew something, I'd rather it be underpowered, like a class or whatever for them because they just wanted to play a thing. Then I'd rather go underpowered because I don't want to be surprised when it breaks the game. So, but we've all got different needs, right? And so that's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
And it's also different once again if you're a player coming to a campaign wanting to use a homebrew thing, that can you have to do some negotiations. You have to be prepared for your DM to say no, even if the thing that you want to bring to the game is clearly not overpowered, because you don't know what in the world and what in the story that thing that you want to bring to the game is going to, what problems it might cause. But I would say be super okay with coming to the table and having the DM say no. Not just because, yeah, okay, they'll say no and you can't use the thing, but now you've given them a hint about
Right.
things that you want. And that is always valuable later on. If I say no to my players about something that they want to do that's outside of the regular rules, if they're excited about it and they're like, oh hey, look at this thing, well, okay, maybe it's not good now, but maybe that thing is going to appear in your loot cache in a level or two. Or maybe I will now homebrew my own version of that thing that just gets rid of the thing that I said no
Right.
to. So having those kind of homebrew on
Right.
homebrew moments in where, a player has brought me this awesome thing that they discovered out in the woods, and I'm like,
Right.
no,
Yeah.
but
No. I'm
no,
as
hang
a
tight.
DM, I'm always a little bit wary when my players come to me with like, "Hey, I found this homebrew magic item. Can we go? Can we do the research thing? We got some downtime and see if we can find it." And I'm like, "No, like that's not a thing you can find because it doesn't exist in the world. Because players don't care about balance. They want to do. They're my inner 12-year-old. They want to do awesome stuff and be badass at everything. And I get it. I get it. But.
Yeah.
Doing that does definitely give me you're a bard who's interested in this sort of a bardic sort of instrument magic item that allows you to do multiple sort of spell like abilities. I can work with that,
Mm-hmm. And I think a good player, and there's a ton of you out there. If you do have those magic items or that homebrew stuff that you want to bring, go ahead and be excited about them. Just be okay with us saying no.
Or a
It's fine.
negotiation of
It's
like,
awesome.
well, that's fine. We can look for that, but here's the tweaks I'm going to make. It's not going to work exactly the way you want it. Are you still interested in it now? So
Exactly.
I
Yes.
would actually offer on the opposite end.
Ooh.
DMs, please look for ways to say yes.
I agree with that. I don't think that's the opposite. I'm just.
Well, I mean, I'm coming at it
Right.
from a different direction. You're
That's
saying
true.
to the players, be prepared for them to say, no, but. From the DM side, try and find ways
even if it's
to
a
say
yes, but.
Yeah, even if it's a yes, but try and find ways. If somebody says, I want to play, come to you and says, I want to play like an alien from another world, and you haven't done anything with that, okay, stop, think, is there a way you can make this cool, work in your game world? Try and find a way to say yes. I mean, sometimes it doesn't work. For one, there are some things that might violate some people's comfort level. There's some things I've seen out in homebrew world that, yeah, I probably wouldn't let in my game because I don't want to deal with some of the subject matter it brings up. But if you can, try and find a way to say yes.
And
I hear this come up a lot in these types of conversations too. Like, I think it was Chris Friskins, but I'm not sure. Not for sure. But the difference between a kid and an adult, going back to your 12-year-old a little bit, Jeff, he would bring up that I think they had found out at some point they could change from a D6 to a different size die when they rolled their stats and started using, I think it was like D10s or something like that. And they were totally cool with it, totally broke the game, but they were totally happy. So sometimes it's not a problem, depending on what you guys what people at the table are looking for from the game. And like, don't always be afraid of, maybe going back to that childhood a little bit. Maybe not for a campaign that's going to last 5 years. Maybe that's when you start seeing the problems come up. But if it's something shorter, for sure, why not experiment?
Yep. No, absolutely. When I ran for my middle school groups, that was I leaned really heavily on the say yes to everything, and if they're overpowered or whatever, like I don't care, because they're having, I know for a fact some of them were cheating, but that's fine, because they were having a blast, and part of the goal of it was an after-school club, and part of the goal was like introduce them to the game, and I want them to be hooked for the rest of their lives. So let them be overpowered superheroes in the world of D&D. That's okay. Like that meets those goals. They're always going to remember that, and they're going to be super excited to play in the future.
The other thing that you can always do, especially if you have your own homebrew or a player comes to you with homebrew, or someone wants to try something, take a break from the campaign and run a one-shot, or run a mini little, here we're going to do 2 or 3 games, and do a play test, essentially, see what it feels like. Because I also do think most players, they want to feel powerful, they want to feel heroic, they want to be able to dominate and be awesome. But I think also most players know that if they are overpowered in relation to the rest of the players, after a little bit you can kind of feel that, and that can be uncomfortable. And I think most reasonable players at that point, when they're trying out some homebrew, they're like, all right, this thing was awesome, but it is a little OP. And they'll come to that realization, but they'll still be able to have that moment. And sometimes you'll only know whether something is too overpowered or underpowered when you actually give it a try. And so, have a one-shot day, have a play test day, and where you just play some silly, 2-hour games. Go on to DM's Guild or go on to D&D Beyond and grab some of the encounters of the week, something you can run really easily that everybody's just going to do a buy-in, and someone's going to use the weird magic item they got off of whatever website, and this person's going to run this homebrew subclass, and they're going to be an alien, and here we go, let's give this a try. And no one's going to be upset because this isn't your main campaign that you've got all this time and effort into, and if things go south, at least it'll be fun, right? So I literally have one of my regular games is basically a playtest game. It's a bunch of us, and we rotate DMs and we just try stuff out, and some of it is stuff that some of us are preparing to publish, and some of it is stuff that some of us have just come up with and we want to try, and some people are running homebrew adventures, and some people it's kind of a hodgepodge of, we want to just try this in a place with a bunch of people that we know will try anything. So give that a try one week with your gaming group. It's super
Sweet.
fun.
And in addition to like the taking a break and doing something different, you can do like dreamscapes can work well with some of the stuff, particularly if it feels overpowered, and also like cutscenes or just scenes that are happening outside the main party, because you never know, maybe somebody accidentally spilled that vat of do not spill liquid on stuff, and now everything's walkie.
And now you get to homebrew the vat of liquid. Ooh.
Nice. So we've had I feel like most of our sort of conversation tips and tricks about all that kind of stuff has dealt with the very sort of crunchy mechanical bits of homebrewing, monsters and magic items and all that kind of stuff. And that's awesome, and that's really important. There's also an element of homebrew where we could spend a whole other episode, and maybe we'll have to come back in a month or so and do this. But we could spend a whole episode talking about how do you do the homebrew for the story idea, for the adventure, for the setting, which is a very different in many ways process. But we've already been talking for like an hour, so I don't know that we want to take on that big of a topic now. So I think it's time for sort of the last thoughts, last tips, last bits of advice. Does anybody have any sort of last thoughts before we sort of wrap things up?
Can I ask everybody a question?
You can do whatever you want.
Sure.
So because you are all proficient homebrewers of a variety of options, and so I was going to ask what your favorite thing that you have homebrewed is and why. I'll go first. I'll give you a chance to, since I've prompted, I'll go first. And I'm not going to talk about any of my homebrew campaigns or worlds since we were talking about the crunch. So I will mention the crunch. I did homebrew a subclass for a cleric. It's the Phoenix subclass that was inspired by the character that I'm playing on the D&D Beyond show. And the reason I like it so much is because I feel like I had a chance with a couple. I have a couple of friends that I paid for editors, and I went through the whole process of like, I'm going to make this a balanced subclass, and I'm going to put this out there as something that actually works. But what I'm proud about is I feel like the flavor of that subclass is very apparent. Whether or not you want to play it, or you are inspired to play it, or you think that it's balanced or not, everyone kind of groks onto what that subclass is all about immediately, and I'm quite proud of that.
I would have a hard time picking one because I've got a lot of stuff. I think I will avoid actually the ones I've published for money, and actually go with the one I'm particularly fond of right now. It's either I came up with a wizard subclass that may or may not turn into something print later, but I put it on my blog. That was the Vitomancer. So it's a wizard that heals, and he refreshes his healing pool by casting necromancy.
Ooh.
So he casts a necromantic spell. He gets a certain number of healing points that he can spend until he goes to a short rest, and then he can build up his pool again by casting another necromantic spell. And so it was I had fun coming up with the idea. I've always kind of liked the notion of the wizard that can heal. That's more from a LARPing side of things. They're more common there. And people were like, "Oh, the wizards can't heal." I was like, I bet you I can make a good wizard that heals. And so I'm particularly fond of that one. The other one is I came up with a different version of humans so that they were less built on being sort of generic and actually had a strong story driving their stats. And I did that for a homebrew world.
And at that point, you're building a world too. So
yeah.
Tracy, did you want to go next? Or you want me to? Okay.
Why don't you go next?
So I was thinking about a lot of things, and then Lauren mentioned that we're going to go more crunchy because that's what most of our conversation has been about. And so I'm also going to go with something a little more recent for my Curse of Strahd game. I homebrewed the Sun Sword into a not completely different thing, but a different thing. I had some players asking me if I was familiar with the idea there's a DM's Guild, popular DM's Guild product about like legacy weapons or whatever, where you can, as you level up, you can sort of pump more powers into your weapons and what have you. And this is not a new concept in D&D. The idea that your items level with you, and not. So I didn't want to introduce a whole new system, but I grabbed the idea and said, okay, well, let's take the Sun Sword. And I tied it to a character's background. It was actually this ASMR character's mother, who was a celestial of Lathander, right? So it was her celestial blade. And it was obvious when he got it, he inherited it, that it was a magical blade, but the hilt and the blade were clearly forged at different times. And after it went through a couple of level ups, so at particularly good sort of narrative points, big milestone sort of moments for the character, eventually he uses it to attack something important, and like the blade shatters, and then the Sun Sword blade appears underneath, and that's probably been my favorite homebrew of recent times. Directly tied to the setting, directly tied to the story, directly tied to that character, and some players who had some interest in some mechanical things kind of got to get a taste of that as well. So.
I'm having a hard time answering because, like, the thing I most want to talk about is something that actually was made for publishing. But obviously, when I designed it, it was before it was published and before it was edited and all that other stuff.
I say go for it. If it's the thing you're most proud of, just because it got published doesn't mean it wasn't something homebrew at some point.
Yeah. Well, and it was for Lost City. This is 4E, so there was a lot of talk in the community about the fact that with a lot of 4E stuff, if you had a big bad, it would just get locked down, and like it just quickly just didn't become very interesting. And so I wanted to try to tackle this, and I had, in the area that I had designed over, there was a lot about plants, and there's this whole struggle between, like, the plants are neutral, kind of, basically, and so, like, good or, like, how you treated them it was part of, like, a big skill challenge. But the monster I designed was a plant that, when it got to the bloody part, broke apart, and then created these smaller ones that had half the hit points of the main one that could then attack you, so it would totally change the battlescape.
Now you can't stun lock one big bad down, because now it's a whole bunch of big bads.
Yep.
Yeah. So so going back, Lauren, to what you were saying earlier about just trying to think through a design problem and, like, throw stuff at it, that was my attempt to throw something at it to see how it would go, and that's why I thought it would fit here. But technically published.
It was homebrew when you came up with it.
Yeah. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. Very good. Anybody else have any? I mean, Lauren sort of took the reins of our last thoughts. But if anybody else had any last thoughts that you just really wanted to get out but haven't had a chance to talk about yet, this is your chance.
There is an occasional thing that comes up on TikTok that I see where people will say homebrew is not D&D. And I've tried to fight this fight, so I'm going to do it here as well and say, no, homebrew, D&D is homebrew.
Well, like, even if you're playing rules as written is you're supposed to make up your own stuff. So.
Well, I mean, the game wouldn't exist without homebrew. The rules that you're playing would not exist without homebrew. Everything about D&D is homebrew. Embrace that. Enjoy it. It's not scary. You're supposed to do it. And everybody will, occasionally flub something. It's not scary. Have fun.
It is a game of improv, and if you're improving, there is a degree to which you're always going to be homebrewing stuff. And if people have their lines of I don't want to accept homebrew magic items or classes or whatever, that's fine. I get that. That's definitely a worthwhile way to play the game. I don't know that I would never say it's not D&D because, like as you said, D&D was built on homebrew, right? And it's baked into the system that you're supposed to make stuff up. I mean, the DMG for 5th edition has, like, here's how to make your own races. So it's built on that idea. Saying that homebrew is not D&D ignores what D&D has always been, and what it actually says about what it is as a game. So I'll back you up in that fight. You let me know when the next Rumble is, and I'll have your back.
I will actually get on TikTok to actually be like, yes, homebrew. Yeah. Do all the homebrew. Have all the fun.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Any other last thoughts? Then I'm going to go ahead and call this the end of the episode.
We'd like to say thank you to our guests. Lauren, where can folks find you?
I am Lauren Urban. You can find me wherever D&D Beyond is sold. You can also find me on Twitter as OboLauren. That's usually the best way to find me. That's my main source of play and fun on the internet.
And Jeremiah?
I have a website, jeremiahmccoy.com, where you can find lots of content I've written, some links to some stuff of mine that you can buy. I'm Tech Noir on Twitter, and I'm Basics of the Game on Twitch and on TikTok.
Awesome. We'd also like to say thanks to all of you who support us by being patrons at patreon.com/.
If you want to get a hold of us, you can email thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can tweet Tracy. She is at Sarah Darkmagic. That's Sarah with an H. You can tweet me. I am at Squatch, SQUACH. And you can tweet the show, which is at The Tome Show, although that's also run by me. So either way, you're getting me on those last two. So.
And that's episode 344, where we brewed up some new features and had fun doing it. In this episode of
The Tome. Recording stopped. We're still on the stream, so if anybody wants to say anything to the folks on the chat, you're welcome to do that.
Thanks for watching us.
Yeah, thanks for dropping on by on a Wednesday.
Right.
I'm trying to jump back into the chat because I left the chat.
Tracy, I assume that Freddie's asleep.
Hoping.
because you're here and your husband is in the chat, so I okay. Fred says yes.
The last few nights, about half an hour after he goes to bed, he's been coming back out and being like, "Dream's too scary." So I was not sure how tonight was going to go.
We could lull a child to sleep, I think, with our conversation. So
I have a homework for that. Wait. I seriously do. I'm gonna do this. I have an item that I created that is literally called Lullabies of Lore. It is completely a role-playing item. It is considered a Wondrous Item Rare. The TLDR is it is a book of lullabies from a variety of cultures and places. The magic part of it is if you sprinkle sand on one of the pages, an ethereal voice starts to sing the lullaby.
That said, I think the important part of what just happened was that Lauren has a new catchphrase, and anytime something comes up now, you have to respond with, "I have a homebrew for that," because that was very exciting.
I don't have enough homebrew to be.
You got to get on it.
Yeah. But now I am inspired. No, that was also one of the first homebrew that I did. That was just a fun thing for inspiration. It's technically in a game because I guessed it on D4, and I asked the DMs in advance. I showed them this homebrew, and I gave it to my character. Gave that to one of the players. So, but I figured it was going to be okay because it's 100% a role playing thing.
Well, I didn't mention it, but I feel like running Curse of Strahd, and because it has such a long history into the in the history of the game, I feel like there's a lot of moments in Curse of Strahd where and it's a published product, so you can't call it homebrew, but they were totally like homebrewing things. Like, you pick up spoilers. You pick up a Staff of Frost and it gives you a flaw. That's not part of Staff of Frost, but you homebrewed that, right? Some of the trinkets, which is new to the 5th edition version. One of my players found and now runs around smoking all the time. The pipe that when you smoke it, like the puffs of smoke come out as like skulls or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those things, those trinkets, and then the minor, the common magic items in Xanathars are some of my favorite magic items for the same reasons we were talking about the alchemy jug and the low level magic that is all just role playing. Those are some of my favorite items, spells, any of that flavor stuff that is not. Is this going to help me hit better? No. But is this going to be a fun moment when we're all resting
and I find those kinds of things are fun, and I throw them out liberally. And some of my players get a lot more out of it than others. I certainly have my min-max or rules lawyer players. And they don't get mad about it because they're also getting some of the other stuff that helps them hit harder, right? But if I was just throwing them, butter knives that are always covered with butter, then they would get mad at me. I just homebrewed that on the fly.
There you go. You've got a homebrew for that.
I actually, I need to bounce. My mom's calling me for some reason at 9-something at night, so I should probably check and see what that's about.
We should wrap up anyway. It is almost my bedtime, and I got to get up and teach a full day tomorrow. So,
thanks for having me on. It was great to talk to you, Jeremiah.
So say goodbye to the stream.